Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Court, this afternoon I'll be talking to you about the plausibility of rights as a condition for the indication of provisional measures. To be quite frank with you, I did wonder what I could shed light on for you, because the question that we are dealing with here is so crystal clear. Is there any doubt as to the non-plausibility of the rights invoked by Azerbaijan? Certainly not. Can one question whether the rights put forward by Azerbaijan are linked to the jurisdiction of the court? Certainly not. You have already decided so. Notwithstanding this, Azerbaijan persists in its desperate strategy of mirror reactions. I could leave it at that. But you are expecting from me a demonstration, which I will now give to you. The facts surrounding the laying of Armenian landmines and booby traps have been recalled by Professor Sean Murphy. I can rely on his demonstration without any need to go back over it. Legal analysis in the coming minutes will confront us with a dogged duality. On the one hand, the invoked rights do not exist in international law applicable here. It is more than just a lack of plausibility. It's a veritable inexistence thereof. On the other hand, if we assume, for the sake of argument, that such rights exist, they manifestly do not stem from CERD. That goes to show that they fall completely outside the jurisdiction in this case. Both grounds are enough to dismiss the application for provisional measures relating to landmines. What are the conclusions drawn by our learned friends? We can summarize them as two propositions. Firstly, laying landmines contravenes CERD because they target primarily Azerbaijani nationals. Secondly, given the danger caused by these landmines, Armenia must refrain from laying any and must inform Azerbaijan of their location. In international law, there is no prohibition on the use of landmines. In this sense, the purported right does not exist. And what is even more true, it's not plausible. What is the legal baseline for our consideration of the following aspects? I will start with the accusation of intentional and willful discrimination. The court does not need me to tell it that the geographical area that we're dealing with has witnessed acts of belligerence of significant magnitude and gravity. Nor do I need to stress the fact that Azerbaijan has initiated large-scale military offensives. In this context, the party that is pushed into a corner and has to defend itself often resorts to the laying of landmines. These serve ictu oculi to slow down the progression of the enemy. It's reasonable to infer that the laying of landmines was carried out in line with military requirements. In this context, no other allegation would be plausible. landmines were found in areas where there were military operations, operations of which Azerbaijan boasts. I put it to you, is it so surprising to discover mines in areas that the defensive state knows is in danger? Where else should it have placed the mines, assuming its expectations of military effectiveness? In Yerevan? It seems to me that the balance is well calibrated for military use and not for civil persecution. Nonetheless, Azerbaijan contends that Armenia allegedly laid the landmines after it had left the territories at issue. Allegedly, it laid them simply for the purpose of discrimination, out of animosity, hostility, resentment. My colleague Sean Murphy has shown to you that, on the contrary, these devices came from contact areas and had been laid for defensive purposes. Arguendo that there's any doubt, evidence should, of course, satisfy the inevitable test. Even at the stage of provisional measures, allegations concerning the shameful, unlawful acts or the acts that are grave and malicious have to be founded in evidence that is strict and certain. Do you see them anywhere here? Azerbaijan has been quite simply making claims and insinuations. I find nothing other than assertions that are discredited by the location of the landmines concerned. When I say location, I mean that the mines have been found outside villages and centres of population. They've been placed between the lines of contact. For this reason, their victims were primarily soldiers. All in all, we have far less than plausibility here. Let us now turn to the specifics of landmines. A mine is a weapon, the effect of which is intrinsically indiscriminate. It explodes when pressure is brought to bear on it, and not when it comes up against a racial feature. This simple fact is prima facie the opposite of any idea of discrimination. We're pretty much in the archetypical domain of indiscrimination. It's not a surprise that the victims of landmines in the theatre of war between Armenia and Azerbaijan on a regular basis were people of different national and ethnic groups. It has to be acknowledged, it's extremely hard to turn landmines into targeted discriminatory devices. Let's take another angle. Think about what it would mean if you were to start to embark upon evaluations related to the third approach for any military operation in an armed conflict. Shelling the enemy causes collateral damage in the civilian population. So it's not just affecting the enemy camp? Well, in that case, is it not discriminatory? Potentially, could CERD turn it into an internationally wrongful act? Landmines are laid in areas where enemy breakthrough is expected. So are they not hitting in the main the enemy? That means that their laying is perhaps discriminatory. Can CERD plausibly convert this into an international crime? Pretty well all military operations and their related actions are, within this meaning, discriminatory. Does that mean that prima facie they fall within the scope of CERD? I do not believe that states would tolerate any such interpretation of the law. And I am sure that that is not your interpretation either. Specific additional elements are required in order to give credibility to discrimination within the meaning of CERD. What I have just said also disposes of our learned friend's arguments as to the effects, and I refer to paragraph 35 of the application, where it says that even if the purpose of actions is not discriminatory, it is enough for them to have discriminatory effect. This interpretation fails to recognize the text of Article 1, Paragraph 1 of CERD, which requires not just a discriminatory effect, but also that a distinction be drawn on the basis of race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin. Any such distinction has not been made in this instance. If a discriminatory effect were to be enough, the words that I have just quoted would be entirely superfluous. I do not believe that it would be legally correct to deprive them of their effet utile. What is more, if the version of our learned friends were correct, then Qatar versus United Arab Emirates would have continued to the merit stage. The effects doctrine is admittedly not applicable when a measure is based on a purpose and an effect that is recognized in international law. That is the case of military advantage in armed conflict. Were it to be otherwise, pretty well any act related to military operations would constitute a potential or actual breach of CERD. We would end up with a clearly absurd and unreasonable result. It is not admissible that we grant the effects doctrine such an immeasurably broad scope. Rather, I have the impression that our learned friends are using it at best as a panacea and at worst as a tabula in naufragio. As demonstrated by my colleague Sean Murphy, there is no new fact and no fact of racial discrimination. There were military operations, offensive by one party, defensive by the other. Any attempt to bring the avatars of those operations into the domain of CERD is both artificial and vain. The same arguments are being rolled out time and again to the same ends. But they are no more credible today than they were yesterday. There is no reason for you to depart from what you indicated in the order of the 7th of December 2021. The conclusions to be drawn are obvious. The invoked rights are both inexistent, as international law does not prohibit the laying of landmines, and not related to CERD, but to military operations, which means that they are not plausible. The two provisional measures sought are not based on any source of international law containing obligations on Armenia in the areas at issue. I've already said that international law contains no general rule prohibiting the use of landmines. Any obligation to abstain is therefore clearly not covered by CERD. So the request before you is tantamount to saying that the court should rule by creating a new obligation on Armenia. This request, together with that for the first provisional measures, somewhat sneakily presumes that any laying of landmines in the future would be a fact of racial discrimination. How could the court rely on such a malicious assumption? The law invoked, the right invoked, is not plausible. It is baseless in applicable law. And again, Azerbaijan is asking Armenia to inform it as to the location of the landmines that have already been laid. General international law contains no such obligation. If one had to give the location of landmines, the latter would lose a significant part of their military usefulness. Nor does CERD contain any such obligation, nor do the texts of international law on mines. What is more, Armenia has given to Azerbaijan the information in its possession on the location of landmines. In this way, it has gone above and beyond its legal obligations. Once again, we see that the invoked right for information is not based in international law, which is applicable here. We see that the opposing party is asking the court to create new obligations on Armenia, and that the right put forward is not plausible. What is more, neither the laying of landmines nor information concerning their location are questions linked or related to CERD. They're to do with the conduct of hostilities and use post bellum. We come back again to the same two-edged sword, a non-existent right, a putative right that's not linked to CERD. The inevitable conclusion is unrelenting in its clarity. None of the rights invoked are in the slightest bit plausible. What is more, there is no link between the measures sought and any right that would be ostensibly plausible under CERD. The provisional measures sought must be dismissed for that reason alone. I come now to a final aspect. The opposing party claimed this morning that the elementary considerations of humanity would oblige Armenia to reveal the location of landmines. It relied on the Corfu Strait 1949 case and Nicaragua from 1986. I'd like to draw your attention to the decisive legal differences between those precedents and this case. First of all, those cases were settled on the basis of customary international law. The court's jurisdiction does not extend thereto in this case. Secondly, the court's recitals on information in these cases targeted primarily the protection of shipping rights. That's not the case here. Thirdly, the previous cases were based on the fact that the state concerned knew where the mines were to be found, which has not been demonstrated here. Fourthly, Protocol 2 from 1996 to the Convention on Certain Classical Weapons in Article 9, Paragraph 2 says that the obligation to inform does not exist when the zones concerned are under the control of the opposing party. Positive law, therefore, says there is no general obligation to inform. And our learned friends attempted to grant a further scope, which cannot be accorded. These reflections bring me to the end of my oral pleading. I'd like to thank you for your kind attention. And I would ask you, Madam President, to call upon Professor Pierre Dargent.
I thank Professor Kolb, and I now invite Professor Pierre Dargent to address the court. You have the floor, Professor.